Many Africans express frustration with their leaders, describing them as ineffective, self-serving, and too influenced by outside interests. 6 decades after gaining independence and escaping colonial rule, significant progress in Africa remains elusive. Urban areas have grown and a modest middle class has developed, yet many still lack basic necessities like food security, clean water, electricity, and access to education and healthcare. The once cherished vision of a united African federal state now seems far off. Although Africa doesn't fully match the dire depiction often shown in foreign media, global indicators generally rank it at the lower end. With a few notable exceptions, African leaders often struggle to meet the needs and expectations of their people. Why does the African political class, after many years, still struggle to meet the basic needs of its people, showing little concern even as countless impoverished individuals risk perilous journeys to European shores? We aim to provide an analysis on this intricate issue. To understand Africa's developmental challenges, it's crucial to look beyond just the leadership and examine the broader context in which these leaders function. We will then outline concrete steps towards solving the problem of bad governance on our continent. First of all, it must be understood that the image of the incompetent and corrupt African dictator follows events that must not be forgotten, namely that at independence, France, the United States and Belgium had killed, dismissed or sabotaged to the point of paralysis African leaders who intended to respond to the aspirations of their peoples. The 60s and 70s, especially, saw an impressive number of coups to replace these leaders with docile and incompetent ones. Our political heroes are no longer alive. Here they are. This pattern is reminiscent of the slave trade era, when European slavers devastated African societies in the 16th and 17th centuries, overthrowing resistant rulers and their armies. By the 18th and 19th centuries, they had established collaborating monarchs who participated in the slave trade. Consequently, it's evident that many of today's African leaders, or the systems that installed them, were largely influenced by external forces during times when self-defense was not viable. Furthermore, being an African head of state is fraught with risks. These leaders are conscious of the history of political assassinations and the presence of foreign military bases on their soil, which can limit their autonomy. Challenging neo-colonial powers or striving for total economic independence comes with grave dangers. Hence, they often continue to trade natural resources at predetermined prices and do not oppose the CFA franc, which hampers the progress of Francophone countries. Yet, even with these constraints and the exploitation of resources, significant funds still flow into national coffers. External factors alone don't fully account for situations like those in Nigeria and Congo-Brazzaville, where despite substantial oil revenues, half of the population lives in poverty. This is where the personal responsibility of African leaders comes into focus. African presidents, much like their citizens, have been influenced by a Eurocentric educational system. This system has historically emphasized the narrative that nearly all significant inventions and advancements came from white individuals, while portraying African ancestors as primitive beings who never advanced beyond prehistoric times. Consequently, many Africans are unaware of the achievements of Black inventors and the existence of advanced Black civilizations. They are often not taught that these aspects of history can coexist. This overlooks the substantial contributions of African civilizations to the global community, including significant influences on Europe throughout history. The Negro does not know that his ancestors, who adapted themselves to the material conditions of the Nile Valley, are the oldest guides of humanity in the path of civilization. Ignoring the historical facts that are carefully concealed from him, or distorted before being taught, he has come to espouse the point of view that colonialist education has constantly sought to inculcate in him in order to ensure his docility, namely, that he has no history or culture comparable to that of Europe, that he is therefore made to obey and not to organize or assume responsibilities. These were the words of our revered ancestor, Sheikh Anta Diop. African cultures are frequently confronted with narratives in European languages that associate the word black, used to describe them, with negative connotations. Additionally, religions like Christianity and Islam often portray God in a way that aligns with European or Arab imagery, subtly suggesting that European and Arab dominance is divinely ordained. These religions also sometimes depict traditional African spiritual practices and ancestors as illogical or inherently evil. Moreover, the media and societal norms often prioritize material wealth and accumulation as the ultimate measures of success. As a result, young Africans emerging from such educational and media environments may develop feelings of self-devaluation, self-hatred, and submissiveness. They often internalize the belief that black lives, perceived as inherently backward, are of lesser value. This mindset paves the way for their induction into groups like Freemason circles, which can perpetuate the spiritual disconnection initiated by foreign religious influences and reinforce their allegiance to external interests. For some, gaining acceptance into predominantly white elite circles is viewed as a highly desirable achievement. Consequently, it's not uncommon for Western powers or multinational corporations to play a role in installing these leaders, either through violence, electoral manipulation, or campaign financing, often deceiving the public in the process. Once in positions of leadership, many African heads of state lack a strong sense of historical awareness or the pride necessary to strive for complete economic independence. Influenced by feelings of inferiority, they often endure humiliations from foreign entities without objection. This level of submission was once highlighted by Brazilian President Lula, who admonished them for being overly accommodating to Western interests. Their governance tends to be materialistic and clientelistic, with a propensity for selling significant parts of their countries to the highest bidders and misappropriating public funds for personal gain. Psychologically intimidated by Western powers, these leaders often display their authority primarily over their own people, whom they view as inferior. This perspective leads to a disregard for the suffering of their citizens. The use of extreme and unwarranted violence to suppress any opposition to their wealth accumulation is not uncommon. Our presidents are not inherently different from the rest of us in terms of their mindset. They, too, are Africans who have been influenced and shaped by the same factors that affect many in our society. They mirror the general populace in many ways. The key distinction lies in the fact that they are influential Africans who possess power. Leaders who have committed themselves to achieving full sovereignty and prioritizing the welfare of their people are rare exceptions, having managed to withstand the pressures and influences of the prevailing system. Former presidents such as Ali Bongo from Gabon, Thabo Mbeki from South Africa, George Weah from Liberia, and John Kufuor from Ghana have been associated with Freemasonry or its related organizations. Within these groups, it is suggested that these African leaders pledge their loyalty to interests outside of their own countries. This issue is indicative of a profound and complex problem. South African President Ramaphosa, who is said to have received millions of rand from wealthy white South African businessmen for his conquest of power. He is well on his way to being the fifth black president not to give blacks the economic justice they have been waiting for since the end of apartheid. President Sassou Nguesso of Congo-Brazzaville, who returned to power in 1997 after a coup that left 100,000 people dead. Senegalese President Macky Sall, who rides in the most expensive limousines in the world, while Senegalese people have one of the lowest Human Development Index (HDIs) on the planet. We are not just going to talk about the obvious problem. What can be done to address these issues? One key solution is to establish a robust military defense. This aspect has been a vulnerability for the past 5 centuries, and it's been the source of many challenges. Regardless of the chosen leader, if external forces decide to intervene, they often succeed without strong defense. China, which faced humiliation during European and Japanese colonization in the 19th and 20th centuries, started to reclaim its stature by focusing and strengthening its military capabilities. Efforts must be made to diminish the influence of financial elites on governance. This can be achieved by creating a clear separation between financial circles and political institutions, potentially through taxation on excessive wealth, while still encouraging entrepreneurial activities. A thorough approach is needed to combat corruption and the impact of foreign financial interests. Additionally, the existing Eurocentric colonial educational system needs to be replaced. An Afrocentric educational approach should be adopted across Africa. This change will instill a sense of immense pride in Africans, including future heads of state, by emphasizing Africa's role as the cradle of humanity and a foundational contributor to global civilization. With this renewed historical perspective, African leaders will be better psychologically prepared to advocate for the continent's interests in a challenging and often unjust global landscape. Thanks for joining us. We are One Africa.